All right, you all. Super excited to have you all here again today. Thank you for joining our Wednesday live leadership chat right here on our YouTube channel. If you are watching us and you are live with us, make sure that you are subscribed to our channel at the Pavone Firm. We want to make sure that we get your live comments throughout this session. Today, I am so excited and also honored to have Principal Raven Askew from New York City, who has done some incredible, amazing, transformational, and legendary work in New York City. You all, we're about to learn a little bit more about her journey, who she is, the work she's done, and you already know we're digging into a case study together, and a very relevant one, might I add. So help me put some emojis and welcome Raven onto our stage. Let's see, let's get Raven on here. And here we are. Let's split the screen. Okay, Raven, say hi to the people for us.
Hi, everybody. How are you?
Yay! Good. So Samantha's in the chat. She said, "Yay! I so love these, and great to be a part
Hey,
of it."
Sam.
Jeffrey is in the house. Jeffrey said Raven is the best, and Samantha said she is my shero, and
Aw.
that's so sweet. So Raven, we're gonna just before we jump in, we already know all of our leaders and speakers, we always share a few of their cool facts. By the way, if you didn't catch her hype song, Nice by Jay-Z, that is definitely a really great hype song. So
Anything
three
Jay-Z
cool,
and Beyonce gets me hyped.
right? Have you been to one of their concerts? Just total side note here. Have you been?
I go to anytime they are in New York, I'm there.
Oh, love it, love
Every
it.
concert. I'm embarrassed by how much money I've spent on Jay-Z and Beyonce concert tickets.
I went to one of their concerts, and a story for another day, but I definitely made my way to the stage that night and
Oh
watched
my
them.
goodness.
That kind of energy that I have at their concerts. But three cool facts about you. The first one is that you're addicted to the game Candy Crush.
Yes.
The other one is that you dropped out of cake decorating school. That was such an interesting fact. That y'all know that in the chat. Drop it in the chat. Dropped out of cake decorating school. Tell us about your cake decorating skills.
So I'm actually an avid baker. It's something that I do to relax. It's the reason why I'm so active, why I run, why I'm always on my Peloton. I do it just so I can eat the cupcakes that I bake. And a friend of mine and I decided to take a cake decorating class, but I didn't know that I was pregnant with my son at the time. So it was really early in my pregnancy, and the homework is to bake the cakes or the cookies that you would be using to practice your decorating on. And just the smell and being in the kitchen at that time was too much for me with the morning sickness, afternoon sickness, and night sickness. So I had to drop out. I haven't been back yet.
Wow. Well, it sounds like you definitely, and I see you working out on Instagram too, by the way, which I love that you share your journey with all of us. It's definitely something that I work hard to do, and I absolutely freaking love cupcakes too, but I try to stay away from that too. All right, and
Cardio
then
for
so
cupcakes is my mantra.
what was that?
Cardio for cupcakes.
You know what? That needs to be a whole shirt, Raven. Cardio for Cupcakes by Raven. All right. And also, this was a dope fact as well. I was a New York City Showcase School principal for the development of your STEM curriculum 3 years in a row. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
So when I had become principal, my school was a new recipient of magnet funding. And the theme of the magnet was STEM education. And there was just a whirlwind surrounding my placement as principal. And I needed some time to really think about what STEM education would look like in elementary school. And it was just an amazing journey that we took as a community to really think about not necessarily encouraging every student to be a scientist or an astronaut, but instead,
Yeah, hold on.
thinking about the habits of
There we go.
mind, technical
Hmm.
difficulties, just thinking about like the habits of mind and what's needed and what makes people successful in those STEM fields. And it was just a labor of love for my entire, we rewrote the whole curriculum, no textbooks. We just looked at standards, and did the work. And at the time, you know, my scores weren't that great in my school community. So it was a really good boost for community morale and to really just showcase that one great aspect of what we were doing as a school community.
Wow. Shout out to you, to your team for putting in the heart and the work. We have Dr. Riley said, "Oh, not able to see Noemi. You can see me now." And then some people just still putting in cardio for cupcakes as well. Well, kudos to you and your school community. That takes a lot of heart. It's very clear that you are leading from the heart and
Yeah.
wanting to do absolutely everything in your power and in your capacity to do what's best for your students. And so for any folks out there considering, I'm gonna just, plug because it's about featuring you too. Principals, aspiring principals, teachers, anybody doing STEM work or has a STEM focused school, this is your go-to person.
Check
Make
us out.
sure yes. Where can they follow you at, Raven?
I'm at Principal Ray underscore every day, but my school is PS 354 STEM. So we are PS 354, the Jermaine L. Green STEM Institute of Queens.
I love it. Love it. Love it.
Me too.
All right. I need to come to your school after all this pandemic. I would love to come and visit.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we all know that every week, every live leadership chat that we do, we dig through a case study, a real scenario. And as many of you know, this week this actual case study really did happen. And there are other leaders who are in this current situation as well. And so I'm going to read the case study and then we're going to unpack it. So
Okay.
here it is. Y'all ready? Drop a fire in the chat if you're ready. Here we go. A group of parents recently stated that they wish to opt their child out of Black History Month lessons. As the school principal, I did not feel comfortable with allowing them to opt out, but we gave parents a choice to participate in the Black History Month lessons and activities. My superintendent felt strongly about giving them an option, and he tends to retaliate and lash out when anyone disagrees with him. Half of my teachers and parents read about this in our school communications portal, and it made public news. How do I make this right? So there is obviously, we got a few fires, by the way, in the chat. So we're about to jump in. Shout out to Dennis McKeezy, Alexa, and Sakina, who's also in the chat. So as we
Yeah.
begin to really think about this, we always want to just think about the considerations, right? Like, what are the factors and the things that we should be thinking about? Let's give some context
Right.
to this case study and then jump into like what direction should we head in? So we'd love to
So,
hear from you. Yeah.
so my first thought when I read it, since you said we're having really honest conversation, was like,
Yes.
they tried it, right? Like, we really gonna opt out of Black History Month? Like, that was my first thought. Like, this is what we doing in
Yes.
2021. Um, and then I had to take a step back because I think one of the things that I am learning and continuing to learn as principal is that there's a big difference between leading with passion versus leading with emotion.
Mm.
So when I really stepped back to think about it, some of the things that I noticed was that parents just wanted to opt out of the lessons and the activities. The principal did not necessarily agree, but she obliged out of, or he or she obliged out of fear of retaliation from their superintendent. And the principal also wants to know how to make it right. But what I wondered was, is this only a Black History thing? Like, does this happen around like Hispanic Heritage
Right.
Month? Are these issues for women's studies? Do we have these same types of conversations around Indigenous Peoples Day? You know, like, why Black history?
Yes.
What's the mission and vision of the school, and how do these units of study align to that. And then my biggest wondering is, or two biggest wonderings is like, how do the teachers feel about parents wanting to opt out of curriculum that I'm sure is otherwise mandatory? Um, and then like, what does the principal mean when they say they want to make it right? Like, what does making it right look like to that principal? So those were some of my
Wondering.
surface ideas
Mm-hmm. So
when it came.
I'd love to just kind of talk a little bit more about, just the principal first, like, because obviously they are the face of the school. They are
Yes.
the key decision maker in this case and in this scenario. And yes, like this is absolutely, there's a lot of explicit racism, right?
Hmm.
And implicit maybe on some levels, maybe from parents. But I think the key thing to focus on, because a lot of our audience are principals, and
Yes.
so when we think about their positioning and their belief, I love that you brought it to mission, vision, but
Hmm.
also your belief as a leader.
Yeah.
That's where it really, to me, it begins. What is it that you absolutely believe in and do not believe in? I don't care if you have one black student in your school, if you have all white students in your school. What do you truly believe? Because your actions, how you approach upper management, how you approach your parents, how you approach your leaders will show not by what you say, but by what you do.
What you do. Hmm.
And so I love that you elevated that point. So if let's take it to this principle, if they were in terms of like making it right, I think we're just going to take everybody through the short term and long
Hmm.
term solutions here. Short term, would you say anything else around, you like as a principal, where should you, what's the type of reflection or thought process that you should have knowing that this has happened on your school campus?
Well, I think it's a great question because I'm no stranger to not always seeing eye to eye with upper management, right? I think my leadership style in some instances is kind of quirky, unique. I love the fact that my thinking is forward thinking, and sometimes it just moves a little bit faster than some people can catch up with. So I completely understand what it means to have a vision and be locked in on something, and everybody hasn't caught up to where you are yet. And the hard part, like I said, is separating emotion from passion. So the first question is like, what's best for children? Why is this curriculum important? Why are these lessons and activities necessary? And I would say something to my school community. I definitely wouldn't dance around it or act like, this isn't happening, and as a principal, I might have to take that short-term loss, right? I might have to just let the parents opt out for this particular unit and lesson, but it doesn't mean I wouldn't use my platform as the principal of the school, as the face of this institution, to really speak to why this type of instruction and why this learning is necessary for all students, right? And that sets the groundwork for all of your strategic moves moving forward. So as principal, like you ride this wave of the rough week of news cycle or what people are talking about, but stay low and keep firing. You're already thinking, you should be thinking ahead all the way to next year. Like, what do you want next February's Black History Month to look like? And what are all of the strategic moves that you are going to make over the next 11 months or, between now and let's say September, to relaunch your school in a way that is repurposed and truly meets your beliefs as a school leader and fits the vision and mission from your school. And maybe it starts with really examining your school mission and vision statement, because there's clearly a disconnect between what parents believe they are sending their children to school to do and to learn, and what you think you are pushing in terms of curriculum and content.
Yeah. So I heard the most immediate thing short term is reflect on your belief, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
why if you fundamentally as a leader, if any leader does not, and really this is for any decision, anything
Yeah.
that is happening, whether it's indigenous, black history, Hispanic heritage, you still have to be able to clearly know and articulate. You talked about
Right.
communicating your why. Why are these the Black History Month, particularly in this season,
Yeah.
important to name and to address for people. We are also in the business of educating, and even
Mhm.
as leaders, we're still in the business of teaching and our communities learning. And that's not necessarily just students, but it's also teachers, it's our parents, sometimes it's our leaders who have been in a position for a really long time. And so, for I'd love to hear a little bit about if this leader is really thinking about how to communicate why this is so important for the school community. We would hope that they know it. I think there are still leaders that are still doing the work. There is
Mhm.
a really big group on Facebook with principals from across the globe, and many of them actually voted on this case study tonight. And
Wow.
many of them were for like saying that this was absolutely absurd. But it's interesting. Many also wanted to hear how would you unpack this as well, right?
Right.
So there's a real audience. I know we have our group, and shout out to all the folks who are chatting in the chat with us. What would that belief, how could they communicate that belief around why are these activities important for Black History Month and other months? Right now, here is, and it's not, it
Right.
just shouldn't just be this month, okay?
Yeah, I was
Like,
going
it
to say,
should
no, I
not
mean,
even
I
be just a
think,
month.
as the principal of the school, I would be thinking about this in a much broader context, right?
Yep.
And again, this is where you're separating the emotion and passion and becoming really strategic as a leader. Black History Month is the hot topic of the moment, but this is
That's
really
right.
an opportunity for the principal to really reevaluate, what's in the explicit curriculum of your school and what's the implicit curriculum of your school. Clearly this is an opportunity to leverage a major shift, right? So
Yeah.
this is an opportunity to really audit your curriculum. What are the goals? Is it important for you to amplify student voices? Is it important for you to, you know, engage students in critical thinking around social justice? Is it important for you to really have a year-long pattern of cultural celebrations and having opportunities for students to constantly see themselves in relation to the world that we live in? This is not a one-off activity,
That's
and
right. Yes.
it's definitely something that as a school leader I still struggle with, because this is more than just educating students. Now you have to take a step back and really think about how you are educating adults. What is their mindset about this? When I first became principal, one thing that really frustrated me, although I knew the adults were really well intentioned, people would come to my office like the middle of January and they're like, I want to do a talent show in February for Black History Month. And for me, I really struggled with that. Like, why is Black History Month always a talent show? Why are we thinking about Black
Mm.
history on January 15th? Like, that's a lot of pressure for
Mm-hmm.
me as a principal to think about how to pull it off. But what's the deeper learning connected to this, right? Like, if we're venturing into thinking about culturally responsive education and what it means for students to see consistent representation of themselves while also making academic gains, right? Like, this is what we are in the business of doing. We are in the
Sure.
business of educating children and empowering them to be productive and ready to meet whatever world they enter. So
Yeah.
it's bigger than
Just
the
this
talent
month.
show. it's
Right.
it's it's bigger
Yeah.
than the beautiful bulletin boards that we all create around our school community, right? Like, I'm not knocking those things, because we do it in my school as well, but we can't lose sight of the fact that our goal is to educate children, and we should be using these themes and topics as a vehicle to push curriculum and content, not as like the teachers pay teachers, no disrespect to people who uses that, but like the bundle pack of printouts and worksheets, right? Like, we should be
That's
talking
right.
about Black excellence. We should be talking about Black history and Black futures, right? We have young
Mm.
children who are entrepreneurs. We need to highlight those children as well. They need to understand that Black history didn't begin and end with slavery. I've been seeing on
Mm-hmm.
social media a lot of images from the civil rights movement and how they've been showing them in color to really contextualize that these events didn't happen 2 weeks after dinosaurs were extinct,
Yeah.
right? Like, we are
Yeah.
still in this fight, and this principle, I think, has actually an amazing opportunity to really pull her staff back to the drawing board and really think about what's important for learning and how do we capitalize on building in critical thinking opportunities for children all year. Like, let's just table Black history for a moment, because I think if you really get your staff and your school community to understand why you are coming to school every day and what the true importance of curriculum is, all of the additional calendar moments and themes and things that are important to you and your school community should thoughtfully work its way into that fold. But it shouldn't be something that you're just thinking about and reacting to at the start of January.
Yo, bars, bars, bars. And everyone who is tuning in later on, I hope that by now you have your pen and paper and you're taking notes, because what Raven is really speaking on is the longer term, the deeply rooted, not the bandages, not the, you know, the things that we do for fluff, which I did it too, right? As a school principal, we had all these different things happening in Black History during Black History Month. But I think one thing that you said a lot of things that were critical. One of those that really stood out is, how do we amplify student voice? How are we ensuring that we are being culturally responsive, not just in this month, but building this into the curriculum, into how we design lessons, into how we show up for kids, into the readings, into how we structure conversations with students. I just got off a PD session with over 100 teachers in a few different states, and what we're working on is essentially culturally responsive strategies. But I put it in quotes because too many people throw this around,
it's too buzzword.
It's too buzzy for me, right?
Yeah.
And like, it's really simple. Like, are you situating learning in students' context? How are you eliciting high intellectual performances? Because that actually does happen. How are we designing learning to where it is asset based and not deficit based? I'll give you a quick example of what came up in our session today. There was a teacher who shared how they were priming students for a lesson. And he was priming them for an article that they were about to read. Okay. And so part of that priming is, asking some questions and having students think through those questions before they go into the reading. One of his questions for priming were, write down all the words that you don't know from this essay. And I think at some point, all of us in some way or another are guilty of doing this. I am. So as this teacher is debriefing, another teacher in the group says, hey, actually, if we're really starting with students' assets and their strengths.
Tell me what you know.
Tell me what you know, right? Like, let's start with so those are the examples. I just gave you a very concrete examples of what examining this curriculum could look like, right? Start observing, seeing where is it that we're actually operating from, particularly if you're serving primarily African-American students, Black students, right? Hispanic students, then you need to be starting there. How are we asking questions? How are we amplifying student voice? How are we eliciting high intellectual performances, whether they're gifted or not? You don't have to have a title of gifted to approach students in that way. Some things go ahead.
I was saying, like, that title of gifted, like, that's a whole other conversation as well. But I think that that's a prime example of playing to student strengths, right? If you have children of any race, any age, any background, at the launch of a unit, and the first thing that we're talking about is like, let's look at all of the stuff that you don't know, it's impacting the mindset of everyone that's engaged in that teaching and learning, because now all of the teachers are thinking about is like, look at all of the stuff the kids don't know, and now it's this constant uphill battle. And as a student, I'd be over it already. Like, why do I even want to read this essay or article if I only know like 5 words? It doesn't make sense. However, if you shift that perspective to say, here's what I'm already an expert on, and the things that you don't know yet, we are going to continue to build on by the end of this unit. It already primes children in a different way for what they are about to experience, and what they are about to learn. And there's a framework that we started using in my school after we had rewritten our curriculum and started really thinking about what equity looks like in our school. Because I remember my husband made a comment to me once that kind of stung me because it was low-key true. So I
She
kept
said low
thinking
key.
about, yeah. um, he said, you have an all black school, but it's not a black school, right? So it's like one thing to have a building that's filled with black and brown faces, but are you really doing the work that's necessary to
Mm,
empower children and see them in their learning? Like, how are they experiencing what you're delivering on a day-to-day basis? So,
powerful.
I saw that really as a challenge to think about, how are the conversations that I'm having at home with my son and my daughter, that we engage in as a family? How do the students in my school experience that on some level, especially when my son is also one of my students, right? So like, how is he showing up in this building every day? He shouldn't be at any more of an advantage in terms of knowing his self-worth and who he is and how he stands in relationship to this world because his mother is the principal. These are experiences that all of my babies need to have in school. And in New York City, we use the Danielson framework to evaluate and rate
Yep.
teachers. But we have decided to take it a step further, and we use something called the TRUE framework. And the reason that I like the TRUE framework, I got it out of a book written by, I'm a former English major and I can never remember the name of the book and the author at the same time, but it's a book about solving disproportionality. And I believe his name is Eddie Fergus. I know it's Eddie Fergus is the author. And the title is somewhere with something to do with solving disproportionality. It was something we
Okay.
started to use as a staff read. And I found this rubric in that book. And I like it because it is really, really grounded even more in how students are experiencing the curriculum that is being delivered. How are they engaging with the content, and how are you playing to student strengths instead of taking a deficit base? And that was a really powerful tool to leverage in our school community because it organically
Yeah.
made the way for us to have discussions around implicit bias and how was that, surfacing in school, and what does it mean to empower students or think we are empowering students, but we're really enabling them, right? Like how is our own belief system really influencing day-to-day teaching and learning? And that's why I think for this particular case study, although on the surface it seems like this is Black history and parents opting out, there's much bigger issues in regards to curriculum and mindset and setting the vision. And I also would encourage this principal to have that difficult conversation with her superintendent or his or her superintendent, because you're going to need their backing and you're going to need their support. And I would unapologetically ask why, as a superintendent, like, what's your goal for teaching and learning if you think it's okay for parents to opt out of Black history in 2021, right? Like, this isn't a case study that you pulled from 30 years ago. Like, this is literally,
This week.
in our news cycle right now. So I think sometimes you have to speak the truth, even if it makes your voice shake. And you have to be able to have these conversations, even with people whose title seems to be higher or, like in a different position of power than yours. You have to have those questions and really have those conversations and really ask those difficult questions, because you also don't want to be undermined at every step of the way.
Yeah. Wow. So you brought up also just having this critical conversation with the
Mm-hmm.
superintendent and knowing that and just naming that that is not never something that is easy for us to do. And sometimes we're given this position as a principal, and with that position comes a lot of responsibility, a heavy responsibility to even speak truth to power when it is needed. And this is one of those cases, and I really appreciate you bringing that point up. Let's share a couple of the things in the chat, and then would love for us to keep going through some
Yeah.
of the actions that this principal can take to
Thank
really
you,
get
Dr.
to
Riley.
the. What did she say?
She just put the name of the book. It's Solving Disproportionality and Achieving Equity, A Leader's Guide to Using Data to Change Hearts and Minds by Edward Fergus. Yep, that's the book.
Thank you, Dr. Riley. I know someone I was sounding so country there. Dr. Riley. You gotta excuse me of the. I've been in Atlanta for a long time now.
I was gonna say that's the
Um,
ATL talking, shouty.
right. When I go back to New York, my people are like, "You're not even from here anymore. You're so embarrassing." But let's see. There was something else, and thank you. I knew someone in the chat was going to drop it in there. Um, Dr. Riley also asked earlier, how do we develop thinking individuals if we fail to provide alternative perspectives that help shape
Mhm.
their stance? Come on, that is
Yeah.
facts. Sakina Pitt said, through debate, Socratic seminars, other opportunities, and like you said, Raven, through discourse around the different curriculum that you're bringing in, right? Different resource, the different sources, different perspectives. I want to circle back to teachers, and one of the things you said early on in terms of the wonderings, right, is
Mhm.
how are the teachers? What are the teachers wondering? Like, how are they feeling? What side are they on? Would love to unpack that a little bit more because as we think about a long-term change here, right, that really needs to happen, lasting, real change, we really need to think about the stakeholders involved. And
Right.
I love that you mentioned that early on. So when we think about teachers, one of the things that comes to mind is again like what percentage of teachers are on board, what percentage of teachers are in the middle, and what percent of teachers are like no, not on board,
Mhm.
right? And then would love
And
to
then
hear
what are
you.
you doing to help them leave? Right? Like
Okay, you were just you right. See, you got straight to it. I was gonna say, how does this align to your mission and your vision, right?
right.
But
I mean, I
here's the
know we
thing.
don't have a lot of time, so we just got to cut to the chase, right? Like I don't
Yeah,
think that everybody in your school community is always
that's
going to
it.
buy into what you're saying 110%, and it is going to take some coaching and some massaging to get people to fully like grasp the concept, right? But for those people who like really just have their heels dug in the sand, again, as a leader, you have to be clear on your non-negotiables, right? And for me, if you do not believe that every black and brown face or every young face in our school community can be successful and has what it takes to be successful, then my school is not the place for you. And
That's
again,
right.
like I
And it's
I am not
okay to say
afraid.
that.
100%, right? And I think sometimes we get caught up in being liked as leaders, right? Like
Yes.
I heard someone say, I was actually in a conversation the other day with my Gray Fellowship cohort of principals that I have come to know and love over the last year or two. And the question was, what did you have to give up in order to be a transformational leader? And one of my colleagues responded, I had to give up the weight of like everyone else's opinion, right? So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes your vision and your leadership, it can be lonely, and not to suggest that your work should be done in a vacuum, because if you're a leader that no one is following, you're simply just taking a walk. However, the people that are really committed to just to almost like sabotaging the mission, right? Like again, challenge them at the door. Like, why are you even here? Like what's going on and how do we help you? Either move to another school, unfortunately, because I don't believe in doing the dance of the lemons, right? Because if you don't believe it
Listen,
here, you shouldn't be in front of anyone's child, right? Whether the school is predominantly black or white, if there's a few chocolate chips sprinkled in the cookie, you are still responsible for putting adults out into the world. So if you genuinely believe that the structures of, in this case, like systemic oppression and white supremacy should be upheld, then I have a responsibility as a leader to get you from in front of children. I think there's also a large group of educators who didn't have this education themselves. So you can't take for granted that everyone who is standing in front of children is really equipped to teach this in a meaningful way that goes a little bit beyond the surface, right? So again, like Black history should be more than the 10 names that we know really, really well.
yeah,
And
yeah.
how are we supporting teachers to really begin to become more reflective about how they need to prepare in order to teach children in today's world.
Love
And that
that.
in as a leader, because you don't always know what you're going to walk into.
Yep. Okay, we lost you there for a moment. Um,
Yeah.
and that's it. I love that you. This is it, you all. Like, if it does not align to who, what, the work that we are doing, then they have to go. Now, there might be some principals out there thinking, well, I have a union. It's not that easy to let them go. All of these things, we have to follow all the steps. Follow the steps, but you'd be surprised, Raven. There are also folks who do struggle with, darn, I don't even know my mission and vision. Like, I don't even know how, as a leader, to
Mm-hmm.
express my position and my belief within all of this. And you cannot push out someone that you think is not the right fit, even if they're not the right fit, if you as a leader are not clearly, if
Exactly.
you're not clear on where you stand and unapologetically are able and willing to say in front of everyone, in front of upper management, hey, this is the people that work in this building, this is what we believe. This is what we do. This is how we do it.
And
And
it has to be, I think you should share your, like if I'm the principal, right? So if we're going back to this particular case study, and I'm thinking about some of the next moves that the principal should be making, it's an opportunity to really sit down and unpack the school mission and the vision with teachers, with parents, with stakeholders, and if the children are old enough in the school. And I work in an elementary school, and my student government is on fire. Like
yeah,
January was legit talking about the insurrection, and
love
like
it.
we have conversations, so we range from voting on a school logo to like, is it worth it to have an impeachment process
Yeah,
with third, fourth, and fifth graders? So I don't think children are too young, but you're strategic in how you choose to set up that panel. But there needs to be some real conversation about what's currently stated, how are we currently documenting who we are. Let's think about what just happened with people opting out and feeling a certain way about what we're teaching, and where are we trying to go, and what do we need to add in our mission statement, what needs to be taken out, like what are our non-negotiables. And as a principal, you have to come to the table with yours. I'd also invite the superintendent, right? Because I think people need to be a part of this conversation. And then
yeah.
as this work is going, I would also be having conversations with my staff. Like, this is who we are. This is where we're going. And I encourage you to stay reflective in thinking about how do you fit into this mission and vision. And if you don't, then I'm gonna need you to see my secretary and schedule an appointment for us to talk about how we're gonna counsel you out of this space, right? Because
That's
everything is not
right.
for everybody.
That's right.
And I have lost teachers over the years because I was just too much, and what we were doing, everybody just wasn't buying what we were selling, or just not ready for it yet,
Yeah.
right?
And that, you know what,
That's okay.
is
Bye.
we have to do what is in the best interest of kids. You mentioned
Children.
of our children. You
Mhm.
mentioned getting teachers to give feedback, parents to give feedback on the mission, on the vision. Also, give feedback on where do we see this our curriculum going, what are we missing, what parts do we still need. And I just want to name here that part of this, obviously, for this specific scenario, this is a shift, a major shift that needs to happen at a very root level. And it's what you were speaking to is building consensus, and that is a huge part of any kind of change management, building consensus through the stakeholders, but not building consensus on the belief itself.
No.
It's building consensus on how this is going to
Right.
play out. And so I just want to make that clear. Like, we're
Yeah,
not
you don't have a
saying,
choice. No, like
right,
there's no choice in if we are empowering students or fighting for representation for everyone in the building, right? And I don't think representation, I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that representation should be happening whether those cultures or races are present in the school building. So this conversation isn't absent or not applicable to a school that is predominantly white. You should be having these conversations even more if, you know, the student body is predominantly white. But also, you know, thinking about I my whole entire career has been here in New York City, so I'm no stranger to unions. And, you know, I do not have the luxury of just walking into a classroom and telling a teacher, you know, I don't think this is going to work out. You know, you have to go. There's definitely a system, but I also want to remind principals that you have to leverage what you have in order to get what you want. And, you know, for the teachers who may not believe in amplifying student voice, or who may not believe in the shifts that you're trying to make, that's going to reveal itself in other ways in the classroom, right? You can still give feedback around questioning and discussion, right? Like you can still give feedback around how you are choosing to engage students. And I will almost guarantee you, Noemi, that the teachers who don't believe in the work that you are trying to push, there are going to be significant gaps in their instruction as well. And that's oftentimes a lot of the reasons why teachers push back, because they are fearful that they don't know how to do what you're asking of them, right? Like that's a
That's
big
right.
piece of the puzzle. So your responsibility as the leader is also to think about how you are developing your staff, because again, you're not going to spend all of this time just to prepare for a Women's Day celebration. You're not doing all of this work to have a more effective, like everybody bringing food from your culture celebration. You're doing this work that's really going to impact mindset and also bolster student achievement. So it's going to be incremental change, and you've got to be working on things simultaneously. It doesn't happen overnight, and there's often many setbacks. I read a book with
Yeah.
my staff called The Brilliance of Black Boys, or I should say, I attempted to read the book with my staff, The Brilliance of Black Boys, because I remember getting to a point in my leadership around the same time that my husband challenged me, just thinking like I could be doing more. You know, there's, you know, I'm all the way Black. I'm 100% Black, you know, but I began to question, how does that show up in my leadership, right? Like, was I leaving a piece of myself at home to kind of appease the larger work, the
Mm,
larger
yeah.
staff body, you know? And that just comes with age and maturity, and just, you know, you have to prioritize your fights, right? You can't do everything on Monday. And when I got to a point where I felt like we were ready as a school community, that I had created a culture of trust and open communication and dialogue, and there was a level of respect of what I brought to the table as a leader, and I felt like we were ready to have that conversation. I was very, very shocked, Noemi, by the response to the text from Black and non-Black staff members, right?
Mm,
Like there, I had this
mm.
kind of preconceived notion that, you know, the Black staff members were going to be like, yeah, Askew, like about time, let's put in that work, let's get it done. And you know, I framed it for my staff by saying, when I started to read this book, I began to highlight in orange all of the things that I was guilty of doing, because I wanted to be very clear
Mhm.
that as a Black woman, there's still a lot that I have to learn.
Yeah.
There's still biases that I bring to the table. There's still a privilege, right? Like I was a nerd in school. There's privilege that I bring to my work as a leader, that I have to remember that everybody doesn't have it as easy in the
Yeah.
classroom that I had it. So I tried to model that this is not about, you know, Black staff members versus white staff members. And, you know, we all have something to learn. And I'll be honest with you, a few chapters in, I realized I still wasn't ready to lead my staff down that path, right?
Mm,
I didn't
mhm,
have all of
mhm.
the resources. I wasn't fully equipped. I had never really given thought to things like affinity groups. You know, how do we really define a safe space? What do you do when someone wants to discuss this and they're coming from an inquiry place, right? So I had to take a few steps and think about courageous conversations and how to have them around race. I had to outsource. I had to ask people for help. I had to rely on other leaders who were further ahead in this,
Yeah.
you know, this work around equity, because again, we're right now in a time where it's a fancy hashtag, and it gets a
Yeah.
lot of views and likes on social
Yep.
media. But this is about children. This is about their lives. And we have to first make sure that the adults are equipped to really, really navigate this work. And it's still that we're a path that we're on at PS 354. We're still doing curriculum audits, because I want PS 354 to be a space where, when we're talking about science, we're a STEM school, right? So if we're talking about women in STEM, or girls who code, or girls who
Mm-hmm.
game, a program we're about to launch, I don't think we should be waiting until February to talk about
That's right.
amazing Black scientists, right? It should just
Yes.
be part
Yes.
of the conversation. Like, if the conversation takes place in November, then it takes place in November. You know, a paraprofessional brought to me a sticker that she had from a Hispanic scientist that she just wanted me to share with my daughter, because she just wanted my daughter to see this Latina scientist. And I'm like, of course, but like, why just my daughter? Like, we have a whole staff who needs to, have these
Yeah.
images, and let's put stickers on everybody's notebook. So, again, this type of conversation that I was able to engage in with my paraprofessional is only able to happen now because of that really uncomfortable space that I took us to, like
Yeah.
2 years ago. Like, this is very recent,
Wow. Wow.
and there were times I would go back into my office after some of these book talk conversations, and I'm like, what did I just do? Like, oh, like, people are side eyeing each other, and, like, white people are apologizing for stuff they didn't even do. And it's just, Black people not reading the book because they like, I'm Black, I don't need to read the book. And I'm like, no, you got to read the book. So, like,
Listen, now if you
there's a
watching
lot
this and
to
you're that
this.
person,
Yeah,
do
there's
the
a lot,
work
but I had
too.
to
We
call them
all
out
have work to
too.
do. Yeah.
We all have work to do. So this principal in this particular case study, it's going to be a rough week for them, maybe a rough 2 weeks. And they're going to have to, you know, like, for lack of a better term, face the music, and just, stand in front of their school community and say, you're going to disappoint some people, because there are going to be some people. If I were a parent in that school, I would be very passionate about my disagreement with someone being able to opt out
Opt
of
out.
curriculum, right?
Someone
Like,
actually said this. Someone said this in the comments earlier. I forgot who it was. They said, "Do we get to opt out of white history
yeah,
and white
like,
culture?" Right.
or like, can I opt out of math? Like fractions is the worst. Like, we just not doing fractions. Like, what precedent
We
are we
don't
setting?
exactly
And this is
that.
why the principal has a responsibility to get in front of this as the school leader, and then talk about, like, this moment, but how they're going to use it to propel the school forward. Because you can't really change this. You kind of got to take this L as the principal, and not because you're afraid of the superintendent, right? Like, if you're a principal who is always afraid that you are going to upset your supervisor, then you're not ever really going to make movement. You're not ever really going to make
Or
change.
and really step into your full power, into your full truth,
Yeah,
into your full calling. And
yeah.
so I really want to just take a moment to honor you and thank you for just leading with just being authentic, right? Authentic leadership, just putting yourself out there, being vulnerable about your experience and your process as a person, as a school leader through this, unlearning certain things, learning new things, taking the process and being like, you know what, actually that maybe I jumped too soon. Let me go and get help. And your
Mhm.
ability to be able to say that publicly really speaks volumes of your leadership, and also more than likely the culture and the climate that you have at your school, right?
No,
And
thank you.
you're very welcome. And so there, Dr. Riley said, real talk. Nadia Jones said, great conversation. Focus on the love. Akbar Cook. Yes, that was Dr. Riley's question. There was a question that was asked earlier. If you're open to it, we'll take a couple of
Yeah,
questions
of course.
from the chat. And Devon, our media person, he's like, put those questions up put the comments up, and I'm trying to figure that out. Here we go. Here's the question. In an era where the dominant culture tries to tell us to get over slavery, how do you attack that while maintaining composure and class, especially considering they control a ton of the literature? How do we combat that? You can go first, and then I'll add
Um,
on.
Again, I think it's about being really strategic about what we're putting in front of children. There's a book written by an 11-year-old girl, My First Protest, right? Like, is written by an 11-year-old Black girl. So now if we're thinking about how we want students to see themselves situated in this real world context, you know, we have someone who is situated in that space who shared her story, you know? So yes, there is a lot of literature that doesn't necessarily honor who we are, but I think we also have the opportunity to leverage certain, like, technology can be a tool or it can be a toy, right? And if you're using it as a tool, you can find what you're looking for to convey the message that you are trying to bring across. And it goes back to my earlier point about staying strategic and not losing sight of your passion, but not allowing emotions to cloud your work, right?
I
You're
was
not going to
just going to bring
change.
it back to that. Yep.
Yeah, you're not going to change
Passion.
this in March, right? Like, and
Yeah.
sometimes as the principal, it could be November and I'm already like, all right, let me start planning for next year, right? Like, you're
Yep.
always taking these hiccups along the road and thinking about how you're going to do it differently in the future. You know, my job as a leader is to publicly always model what it means to be reflective, what it means to be transparent, and what it means to be vulnerable. And that's how you maintain composure in class, right? You don't situate yourself in a place of perfection. You situate yourself as a public learner, and we are in this together. We are teaching students to be prepared for a world that does not exist yet, you know. And I think this shift that we all had in this pandemic, going to remote learning in New York City, we had 3 days to figure it out, 72 hours to shut down our entire school building, get everybody home, you know, and keep teaching, right? Without having a real
Yeah.
opportunity to discuss the digital divide and all of the inequities that come along with not having
Mm.
Wi-Fi, you know, not having just stability or routines. So
Yeah.
there's always going to be something that you are juggling, and your responsibility as a leader to set the pace. And remember that just like students, you have to give adults what they can handle based on what their readiness level is. You
Yeah.
just can't change it all overnight.
Wow. You know, you said it all. Like you said it best. And the point that I want to bring us back to is a point that you brought up earlier on in this conversation: passion over emotion, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
let your belief drive your passion, drive that belief to drive the changes that need to happen. And someone
Mm-hmm.
also said it in the chat. You can control what's in your sphere of influence, and everyone is
Influence.
giving you much love in the chat. OSG is definitely, shout out to the
Shout
OSG
out to
fam
my
who's
OSG
definitely
family.
in the house. So
Oh yes,
thank
and
you.
London Carter
Yes.
Williams. She is the brilliant young lady who wrote the book, My First Protest. I don't know if I have it. I don't have it up here with me in this
Our
bookcase, but she's the
my
author.
first protest, London Carter
Yes,
Williams. Thank you so
yes.
much for that, Sakina. I don't know if she goes by Sakina or Pitts. But Raven, I just want to thank you for this conversation. It was so
Thank
empowering. I
you.
know that, and this is something that is really needed. And I think that there are a lot of leaders grappling with. Sometimes it's not necessarily the belief. It's like, I just need to know that there are other leaders and that there is a full community of principals out there who are
Yeah,
actually doing this work and taking the stands and having the uncomfortable conversations. And that alone is giving me the courage to go back and to
yeah,
do the real work with my campus. Also, just you mentioned earlier, some of the things you had to do in your process was go and find other people who could do the work better, who could maybe have the conversations. And I just love that you said that. And that is something that I believe that any leader who watches this, they're going to see people in the chat, they're going to see you, me, and know that there are other people doing this work and that they're
yeah,
not alone on an island doing this work by ourselves. You know, like, we have our community
yeah,
and our people and our digital social media community, but there are lots of principals who also have never even heard of a conversation between two leaders happening like this. Like, oh, you do that at your
yeah.
school? You did
And I
that?
think that's a huge misconception, Noemi. You know, even I remember when I was, you know, on my administrative track, one of the things that they constantly drill into your head is that leadership is lonely, but it doesn't have to be,
That's right.
like
Yes.
but you also have to seek out the relationships that you're looking for and be really
Yeah.
active in cultivating them, right? So, I have my OSG family, and they get me through a lot. They are my motivation. They're my hype people. I mentioned earlier I joined Gray Fellowship, which is also a program for principals exclusively in New York City, and they came into my life, Noemi, in a time where I had literally put in resignation papers, right? So my
Wow.
2 weeks notice, I'm here 2 years later.
Mm.
I was literally ready to
Wow.
quit my job, but my work with them helped me remember my
That's
why, and
powerful.
really also helped me find that balance with wellness, right? So I joke cardio for cupcakes, but it got to a point where I was just busting down them cupcakes because I was just stressed out, right? So I think it's really important. And it doesn't necessarily have to be these structured settings, right? Like you should have a group chat with just 4 or 5 principals who's just hyping you up on a Monday, right? Like that you're just sharing ideas with, that you might need to just chime in and be like, tell me if I'm crazy, because this is what I just saw. And should I send this email? You send a screenshot, and they help you critique it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have all of
Yeah.
those things. I
Yes.
have, we were talking to Sam earlier in the chat. Sam and I started teaching together 20 years ago. She's
Wow.
a teacher that during my preps, I would just go sit in her classroom and watch what she was doing, because the kids weren't jumping out the chairs in her room like they were jumping out in my room. So, mentorship is really, really important, right? Like invest in yourself as a leader. You have to get
Yes.
coaching. You have to have mentorship. Shout out to my mentor
Yeah.
Dennis. It's
Yeah.
it's vital if you are going to do this work in a bold, courageous,
That.
and innovative way, right? Like if you're trying to
Yes.
really push past the status quo,
Surround
you
yourself
have
with
you,
that.
you have to surround yourself with greatness, right? Like
Yep.
I mentioned that I was a showcase school principal, and I remember visiting other showcase schools, right? Like a principal in the Bronx, Alexa. I think she is dope beyond imagine. But another thing, as leaders, you can't be afraid to tell other leaders they're dope, right? So like
Yeah.
I visited her school, and I was like emailing, like almost stalking her, and then come to find out a year
Literally.
later when I joined Gray Fellowship, who was in that program with me? Alexa. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like you don't even understand how much I admire your work and what you do. So it has given me an opportunity to really see other examples of greatness. See people in my age range doing it, right? Because it's
Yeah.
another thing to be a Black leader. It's another thing to be a young Black female leader. All of that adds to your leadership story and how your journey unfolds. So, leadership doesn't have to be lonely, right? Like find your tribe, find your
Mm-hmm.
people, and contribute to your tribe. You don't want to be the weakest link, steal, starve, and steal. So just do the work. Don't be afraid. Keep going.
I'm literally, Raven, I'm just sitting here just smiling in total admiration. Because even
Thank
before this
you.
call, you were like, I'm not sure about the whole public this speaking thing. And
Yeah,
just
it's
to
not my
see you
thing.
like shining and literally sharing all the knowledge, all the gems, your experience, your wins, and how you are so hungry to just become the best version of you. It's
Mhm.
so clear that passion is driving you. So thank you again. And everyone is showing you love. By the way, in the chat, they said also Raven for U.S. Secretary. Someone else said, I think it was Dennis said Raven for U.S. Secretary. Someone said Raven for Chancellor as well. So
Can I wear
the
sneakers? I'll do anything if I can wear sneakers to work.
that's right. So tell us a little bit about where can we find you as we wrap up? Where can we go and follow you and follow your work? And then we'll also just close out with any last pieces that you may have.
Sure. So if you want to find me and just like my leadership and what that looks like on a daily basis, it's Principal Ray _everyday on Instagram. If you kind of want to see the impact of what that looks like in the classrooms and across the school, then you can follow my school's Instagram page at PS354 STEM. And that's really it. I'm just, I'm actually more proud of, my school and my teachers and, just everything they have accomplished. I'm like just along for the ride, right? Like I love to see that. Shout out to my mom, right? Like just my mom is a retired principal, and I watched her just be really frustrated sometimes about the things that I fight for now. So
Is
that's
she in
just
the
something.
chat?
I don't know if
Oh,
she is.
okay.
She probably just started crying. I don't know.
Oh. Shout
And
out to mom.
shout out to my mom. And I bring that up because I started teaching in the same district that she was a principal in.
Wow.
And I'm a fighter, right? So I never really wanted anybody to know that she was my mom because I was so young when I started teaching. So I didn't want people to assume that I was there because of my mom, right? So as I got older, then when I got married and changed my name, it was like, great, I can be in these spaces and people just like don't even know
Right.
where I am because I work damn hard, right? So I want people to put respect on my name.
Put
But I
some
think
respect on her name.
yeah, and then sometimes my mom was like, why don't you tell people, that we're related or we're connected? Are you ashamed of me? And I'm like, no, I think you're amazing. I think you're dope, but I got to do this on my own. So now that I'm a little bit more solidified and people have put some respect on my name, shout out to Paulette Glenn. She's a dope leader.
Well, she also planted a lot of seeds along the way. And so,
Yeah. Yeah, I get my fight from her,
and
definitely.
so I'm sure she can see in the chat. Mom, if you're not reading the chat, read the chat because you'll see everyone just showing so much love. So, Raven, thank you again for taking time out of your very busy schedule. I know that you could have been doing so many other things, and you chose to be here with us and empowering the larger community. And so, thank you again. And we'll stay connected. Also, for all of our viewers, make sure that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. It's the Pavone Firm, and share this video. If this video helped you and you believe that other people need to be hearing and listening, whether it's a parent community, a superintendent, whoever your network is, go and share this video. We need people. This is how we empower. This is how we grow our community and grow a collective power.
Absolutely.
So make sure that you share this video, and you can follow us at the Pavone Firm. You can also go to thepavonefirm.com to learn more about our coaching programs. Also, if you are an aspiring principal and you are currently interviewing, y'all remember that? The interview process, right? It is an interview both ways. You have to pay attention to, is that not because it glows and has all the bells and whistles on the outside does not mean that that's a school community. So we're having a session. So what was that?
You're right. Like thinking about this principal in the case study who like is having a fundamental disagreement with the superintendent. Like, what's those critical questions you ask during your interview? Like that's another misconception, right? Like if you turn down the first job, they'll never call you for another one. Complete fake news. They will call you. If you're dope, they're going to call you.
Exactly. And so we're doing a session in a couple of Saturdays. It's more information is on our website under events. Where Dr. Perkins, who is the director of Summer Principals Academy at Columbia University, and I are going to be doing a 90-minute session, case study based. We love case studies around here. Here's the school, here's what it is, what are the questions you go and ask, and you will walk away empowered for your interview. So make sure you look into that. And Raven, again, thank you. Thank you to our audience, Lawrence, Laura, Dennis, Constance, Akina, your mom, I don't know her name, but your mom.
Paulette Glenn. I see my Uncle Wayne in there. I'm probably going to have to pay him for this appearance later. So,
Dr. Jones as well, Lawrence Elliott. Thank you, everyone. All right, you all be blessed and enjoy your day. Thank you. Okay, bye. Raven, hang tight for a second.
Okay.